Dead Space, developed by EA Motive, stands as a full-grounded remake of the 2008 survival horror game of the same name, complete with modern production values. And when I say that this is a remake, EA did not fuck around. Dead Space is a series that has been lying dormant for years, with many thinking that the franchise has been dead and gone with no chance of returning, as its original development studio Visceral Games had been shut down by EA many years ago. So when rumors began to sprout that EA was working on a remake to Dead Space, officially revealing the debut trailer, I was immediately interested, especially after the developers began showing what exactly they were working on with the new elements that would be implemented. Now, the original Dead Space is one of my favorite video games of all time. I've played through the original Dead Space as well as its sequels several times on multiple platforms, including Xbox, PlayStation, and PC, and I've covered all three games in a retrospective on the channel quite some time ago. After spending over 12 hours playing through the remake, I walked away extremely satisfied. Out of all the video game remakes that I've played, which includes the brilliant Resident Evil 2, the okay but ultimately disappointing Resident Evil 3, the ridiculous unfinished Final Fantasy VII remake, and now this game is easily the best video game remake that's been released thus far. Seriously, this game is almost perfect. I had no major complaints with the changes that were made from the original, and it's obvious that EA Motive put their best effort into this project. Dead Space is a game that I know front and back, having played it religiously multiple times over the years. So when I was going through this game, there were two things I was mainly looking for. The first is how much was kept the same, and the second was how much was actually new and or altered from the original. Throughout basically the entire game, it's kept extremely close to the original game, which in the end is a good thing. Dead Space has earned a very rare reputation as being one of the greatest horror video games ever made. EA, the publisher, along with the developers at EA Motive, clearly understood that, and have built an experience that matches the original. Nevertheless, if someone were to raise the question as to whether or not Dead Space, the remake, is just as good as the original game, I'd say, yes, it is. Not only is the remake just as good as the original, it's actually better than the original game for a few distinct reasons. Now, I just mentioned that the remake is kept close to the original game, which it is, but there are a number of changes that have been made to make the remake the better product overall between the two. And every change that the Motive Studio made with the development of this game has elevated it over the quality of the original 2008 release. The first major change is a visual one, but it's such an important addition, which is the dismemberment of the necromorphs. The dismemberment is one of the core gameplay factors that made Dead Space stand out from its contemporaries, which includes its main influence, Resident Evil 4. The game not only encouraged, but it enforced the rule that the player must strategically target the limbs of the enemies to dispatch them in a quick manner, without expending too much ammunition. It's one of the best gameplay mechanics I've seen in a video game to this day. The remake brings this emphasis on targeting limbs back the exact same way it was in the original game, but it adds a visual element, which is the effect of removing, cutting, burning, and blowing the necromorphs down to the bone, literally. I just got the Force gun. Damn, this thing is powerful. That damn thing was stripped to the bone, yo. Crazy. Almost every enemy in the game has multiple layers, which include skin, muscle, and skeleton that can be extracted with every shot until there is nothing left but marrow. It's a very neat visual effect that's extremely satisfying and keeps the combat system engaging. The next major change is the presentation of the story. The story is exactly the same as it was in the original game, but the way it's presented here has been altered with a more cinematic approach without taking away from what the original game is. Just like the original Dead Space, the remake utilizes in-game cutscenes in a very proficient way that emphasizes the updated visuals. And it never takes control away from the player for too long before allowing them to get back into the action. As someone who played this game on PC, using a DualSense controller definitely gave the game a distinct feel. I recommend the experience being played on a PlayStation console for those who don't have a PC, if you had to choose between Xbox or PlayStation. Another change that seemed to be a small one to some is actually one of the best elements in the game as a whole, and that's the decision to give Isaac Clarke a voice. Gunnar Wright, who voiced the character in Dead Space 2 and 3, returns here, and his performance matches that of his previous work. Isaac Clarke is very nuanced here, and he reacts in ways that are very believable. During this game's development, EA Motive did say that Isaac only speaks when other characters address him, and that was a lie. He will sometimes speak in combat when fighting enemies, and it's a very humble addition that I loved. Visually speaking, like many others, I didn't really care for the redesigns of Isaac himself regarding the face as well as the Nicole character, but I didn't hate it either. The Kendra character is arguably the best redesign, as her facial aesthetic closely matches the character from the original game. The same goes for Hammond. And I must say that the death scene with Hammond was fucking brilliant. He goes out like a boss instead of a victim like he was in the original game.
Get the door open. Jen? Christ, what did that thing do to you? Help me get him to the Kelly.
Shoot him. It's not shit. Shoot him!
Jen?
Helmet!
You're okay.
Oh God. Helmet! No!
Quarantine lockdown disengaged.
That was a great change as well that I appreciated. The biggest changes when it comes to the level design really start showing up in Chapter 6 onwards. There are some sections that have been blended together and some that were removed and replaced with something new. These changes are ultimately good and work to the game's benefit, mainly due to the fact that they removed the more tedious and repetitive nature of the original game's formula, which was to go on the tram, which takes you to a new area, you play through the level, go back to the tram and go to a different area, rinse and repeat. That element does return here, but it's not as repetitive as the original game. What EA Motive has done here is that they basically removed the chaff of the original game, and they've removed those slower moments from the original and have given the game a better pace as a result. So the pacing in the remake is greatly improved over the pacing that was in the original Dead Space. But unlike the Resident Evil 3 remake, nothing that was removed hasn't been replaced with something else, something new. This is a game that does clock in at around 12 hours, closer to 13 if you do the side missions, which are also new. And the original Dead Space was also 12 hours, so you're getting roughly the same amount of content, if not more, than what was in the original game. Also, the music has been greatly improved as well, as it even plays in moments where nothing is really happening. It adds an ambience to the game that the original didn't have. Also, the horror motif version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star does return here in one moment. And if you played the original game, you'll recognize it easily if you pay attention here. Save points do return, but autosaves have been added, which are used to load the player back to their most recent autosave in moments after they've died, and booting the game up is rather quick, instantly taking you back to where you left off after selecting the continue option. When it comes to difficulty, I first tried to play the game on impossible mode, which was a difficulty option from the original Dead Space, but it's been changed to a permadeath mode here, where if you die on impossible mode, the game will reset to the beginning, or you can continue on hard mode. I made it to the medical area and died, having to play on hard mode from that point going forward. This is one change that I didn't like. I don't like permadeath in any video game. Video games are not real life. Anything can go wrong at any moment due to the designs of the enemies or a simple mistake on the player or really anything. Permadeath mode is something that panders to the masochistic audience in the gaming community, and it's not something I support for any game that offers it. The original Dead Space didn't have permadeath mode on impossible, so the inclusion of it here the way it has been implemented doesn't make much sense. And it's even worse that they made it an achievement to finish the game on impossible mode in order to 100% complete the game, which was a rather poor choice. It's actually funny that despite me dying a few times throughout my first run, the game still gave me the achievement anyway, despite the fact that my save file from the second chapter onward was clearly labeled as hard mode. Don't know how that happened, but regardless, even on hard difficulty, this is not a difficult game. Enemies are easily dispatched, and even the strongest necromorph in the game was actually made weaker in the remake, which are the brutes.
Quarantine lifted.
This surprised me more than anything else. Another change that I thought was extremely important that I greatly appreciated is the new weapon upgrade system. The original Dead Space had the same system, but it was too grindy and played out. The only way you could upgrade weapons and equipment was through finding nodes that you would expend in a skill tree-esque menu. The problem was that the upgrade menus for these things had too many empty spots that you were forced to waste nodes on, which the nodes themselves weren't even common to find in the game anyway, and buying them was incredibly expensive. This game forced the player to play through the entire game, a minimum of 4 times just to have everything fully upgraded. That is not the case here with the Dead Space remake. Every node you find will go towards an upgrade. The empty spots have been removed, and the menu has been cleaned up a bit to give it a more modern look and feel. Huge improvement over the original. The kinesis and stasis mechanics return here, and they controlled just as well as they did in the original game. You can pick up enemies and severed limbs off the necromorphs and launch them as weapons at your target. You can slow down enemies, which is more emphasized here in the remake than it was in the original game. I was surprised at how responsive these mechanics are in the remake and how close the developers at EA Motive got them to the original version. Particularly the kinesis mechanic, which is virtually one-to-one with the response of the same mechanic from the original Dead Space games. New Game Plus also returns here, and I want to note at launch, unlike other games such as God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, and the Callisto Protocol, where the feature was implemented after release when those games clearly needed it from the jump. My personal favorite changes from the remake come from the weapons. All of the original weapons return here in the remake, including the classic plasma cutter, the force gun, the line gun, and the like. However, where the arsenal shines this time around is improvements with weapons that weren't that great in the original. In particular, both the flamethrower and the contact beam were both vastly improved over the original game, where I hated the flamethrower and the contact beam wasn't that great in the original Dead Space. Here, both weapons have had a significant increase in damage output, and the contact beam specifically actually fires a beam of energy this time, with its secondary fire matching the weapon from the original game. Fantastic improvements all around. I also appreciated the inclusion of side missions, which was not a thing in the original Dead Space. You have a few select side missions that have been implemented that have been broken up into pieces and have you backtracking to various parts of the ship to collect materials leading to weapon upgrades, as well as other rewards. There's also the marker fragments that must be collected and brought to a specific location in order to unlock the alternate ending, also listed in the achievements. I realize that not everyone will like this inclusion, but it is completely optional. The side missions don't greatly wear out their welcome, there's not an overabundance of them, and they're quick and easy to finish, giving players something a bit extra to do without wearing the formula too thin. With everything that has been improved, nothing has truly been downgraded or made worse from the original game. The only thing that kind of bothered me was Isaac's sprint animation. It's not that it's slow or that he can't run around enemies in tight spots, because he can, but it's rather the way the sprint mechanic was mapped to the controller, which it's placed on the left stick for some strange reason. I know that this is common in many different kinds of video games to map the sprint button to the left stick, but I felt that in this instance, it should have been kept on the shoulder button. And the animation in the remake is so smooth that sometimes it's hard to tell if Isaac is actually running or if he's just walking. This can be a problem in combat where you have multiple enemies on screen to deal with. It's a small thing, just something that irked me. Another thing that I didn't feel right about were the moments where enemies will grab you. While this doesn't happen very often, when it does happen, Isaac's damage output is nowhere near as powerful as the original game. Enemies won't instantly die or have their head removed when Isaac fights them off, which was a thing in the original game. That was disappointing, but again, it's a rather small inconvenience, nothing to truly be critical about. I will say that a quick turn option in the same vein as the Resident Evil games would have definitely been appreciated here, as there are a number of moments where enemies will simply walk up behind you and you can't just turn around and deal with them in a quick fashion. Again, a small gripe, but nothing egregious. The biggest problem actually comes from the PC version of the game, which has some minor stuttering issues. Like many other games ported to PC, there have been many players that have downvoted this game due to them not being able to run it despite meeting the PC requirements, but some of these people claim to have 40 series and 30 series GPUs, So the issue is likely that they didn't update their drivers before starting the game in the first place. Trust me, as someone who is a part of the PC community, most PC gamers aren't nearly as smart as they like people to think they are. However, this game absolutely has poor performance on the Steam Deck. It doesn't run right at all on that device. The Dead Space remake, in fact, on the Steam Deck, drops frames faster than Eminem drops bars on a track. Yes, it's that bad. But of course, this is not an issue with the game itself, as the Steam Deck doesn't run every single game properly on that device in the first place. So that's a Steam Deck issue. It's not an issue with the game itself. Overall, with all the improvements, which includes a number of changes and additions, Dead Space is a damn near perfect game. It manages to trump the original in virtually every way, and what's even better, it's given the series a chance to return to the industry with a new sleek look not yet seen before until now. When the argument arrives that remakes are pointless when it comes to video games, this game proves that remakes are not only relevant, but they're actually essential to keeping the greats alive. This game kills that argument that video game remakes are just money grabs, just blatant cash grabs, if the Resident Evil 2 remake didn't do so already. Dead Space further emphasizes the argument against that criticism when it comes to video game remakes. Dead Space, the remake. If you haven't bought it, do yourself a favor and do so. There are a lot of people that watch this channel who have not bought a next-gen system, who don't have a gaming PC. To those people, I highly recommend that you pursue upgrading, because this game is only available on PS5, the Xbox Series consoles, and PC. And this is the best video game that I've played in a very long time. And I give my kudos to the developers at EA Motive for their hard work, and EA itself for releasing a true quality single-player experience. EA Motive, who worked on Star Wars Battlefront 2, Star Wars Squadrons, and now this, is currently working on the single-player Iron Man game for EA in association with Marvel as their next project. And I'd say that that particular game is in great hands. As far as I'm concerned, the Motive Studio is EA's best one currently operating right now, and I'm looking forward to their next release with great enthusiasm.